Everybody knows, and everybody in the world knows, that Korea has achieved unprecedented rapid growth and transformed itself from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the wealthiest. There's absolutely no question in my mind that so much of Korea's success was driven by the focus on education. I think there's no question about that. So I just want to give you a little background about the World Bank, because what the World Bank has done with Korea is a very interesting way of looking at the Korean development. So again, I was born in 1959, and in 1959, the official position of the World Bank was that Korea was too poor to get a World Bank loan. Almost anyone could get a World Bank loan. What they said specifically was that Korea was rural, that Korea's educational attainment was much lower, still recovering from the war. They also pointed out that all of the industrial capacity and most of the mineral wealth were in North Korea, right? They were thinking, the final sort of conclusion was, Korea would need just direct aid for a very long time. They were not going to be able to sustain their economy without a lot of direct aid. So finally, the World Bank was considering making its first loan to Korea, and the first loan was for a 고속도로, a highway, about $14 million. And then the second loan that Korea took was for education. This was 1969. And when they took that loan for education, inside the World Bank, people made fun of Korea. These guys are crazy. Why would they take a loan for education? They know they should focus on infrastructure, highways, energy. That's what's really needed in Korea, not education. So that was a very important phase in Korean history, and the fact that they did prioritize what's called soft infrastructure versus the hard infrastructure of roads and energy, I think was really important for Korea's success. And the story, the president of the East Asia region of the World Bank Group put a pile of papers on my desk, like the second month that I was at the World Bank. And he wrote to me was, funny how wrong we get it sometimes.
총장님, 그렇다면은 조금 더 구체적인 세계은행의 역할이 있을 것 같은데요.
So, as World War II seemed to be coming to a close, representatives from the ministries of finance of many countries in the world came together in a tiny town in New Hampshire. And then there were representatives from the Treasury of the United States and about 45 countries. And so they got together and they said, after the war, we're going to have to do things to make sure that the global economy is stable, right? And the World Bank, it wasn't called the World Bank at the time, it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, was formed to support the rebuilding of Europe. Because World War II, Europe was just destroyed. So we call it IBRD, was specifically built in order to support European development. But General George Marshall announced at the Harvard commencement that he was going to launch the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was one of the largest direct aid programs in the history of the world. So IBRD had to find something to do, and so they decided that they were going to focus on poverty elimination. They were going to provide loans. And so let's just take one example, African country. Because people think that an African country is so risky, so if they're going to borrow $1 billion, there will be very few banks that will even consider lending to these countries. But if they do, it will be something like, they have to pay it back in 3 years and they'll charge over 10% interest, right? But if they go to the World Bank and they get an agreement with the World Bank, they can pay the World Bank loan back over 30 years, and the interest rate, and again, I'm not giving you an actual interest rate, but in terms of scale, it will be 4% instead of over 10%, right? And For the 77 poorest countries in a program called IDA, right, they give you money, you get a 10-year grace period where you don't have to pay anything, and then you pay back over 30 years. So it's a 40-year loan at 0% interest. And the developing countries love getting money from the World Bank because they also get free technical assistance in addition to doing it. Once you can agree on what you're going to borrow for, it's great. You know, free technical assistance, support all the way through, getting money at rates that you never would be able to get otherwise. All right, but now let's go back to education. What happened in Korea so that an educational system that was the envy of the world became referred to by Korean young people as Hell Joseon, right? What happened in Korea? According to the Korean Educational Development Institute, about 49.2% of Korean parents responded that private education expenses are a heavy burden, right? In reality, half of children under the age of 6 receive private education, half under 6. And even among children under 2 years old, 25%, 1 in 4, is receiving private lessons. So, you know, this story just came out, right? One of the famous English language institutes. So, Hell Joseon means that there's a cruelty of the experience. What I've heard from some young people is, I am not going to have children. Why would I subject another human being to the hell that I had to go through? Okay.
우울증.
So 36.8% of people in Korea are thought to be depressed. So there's been tremendous growth, as we know, but this is really disturbing. Highest expected rate of depression in the entire OECD. So what's to blame? So Jonathan Haidt says that the front-facing camera, because of social media, and high-speed internet access, if you put those together, anxiety and depression among young people goes up. So once again, Korea is the highest social media usage. And Korea at 89.3% is about 1.7 times that of other countries. So we know that the use of social media and anxiety and depression are linked, and Korea is one of the most difficult situations in the world. Right? So another thing that you ask, okay, so if 36.8% of all Koreans have depression, how many of them get treated? Only 2% of Korean people get access to antidepressive therapy. So again, this shouldn't surprise us that suicide rates are high. If the highest rate of depression and lowest rate of treatment, there really is the lowest rate of treatment in OECD. Loneliness, we know that so-called godoksa, right? Godoksa is higher in Korea than anywhere else. One of my former students was the Surgeon General, the top doctor in the United States, and he said, if you answer yes on a questionnaire when they ask you, are you lonely? It shortens your life the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has a direct effect. Anxiety and loneliness have so much to do with suffering, and it's an entirely treatable phenomenon. And the only way to fix it is for the Korean people to demand that it gets fixed. Right? In the US, you see a lot of celebrities talking about depression. You know, Dwayne Johnson said depression doesn't discriminate, it affects everybody. Lady Gaga also said that she suffered from depression her entire life, founded a nonprofit. The British actress Emma Thompson also said depression is really common, it's something that we should all think about. And I had the great good fortune of meeting the BTS guys, and I was on a panel with them at the UN, and RM gave a beautiful speech about how people should love themselves.
I have come to love myself for who I am, for who I was, and for who I hope to become. What is your name? Speak yourself. Thank you very much.
It wasn't specifically about depression, not specifically about suicide, but it was wonderful. So there's the possibility that we can talk about this more effectively. A story about a friend of mine. His name is Kevin Hines, and he's a very famous person because he's one of the few people to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, in San Francisco, one of the highest bridges. He jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he wasn't either killed or paralyzed. There are only about 3 or 4 people in history who've jumped and were not killed or paralyzed. So Kevin is still there, and he still struggles. But here's what he told me that was just so powerful. He said that before he jumped, he was walking back and forth on the bridge for 45 minutes, looking very distressed, right? And there were many people that walked by him and saw him. And he said that if one person had asked him, "How are you doing?" he wouldn't have jumped. And the other thing he says that's crazy is he says that when he jumped off the bridge, he thought he had endless problems. His problems were unsolvable. But he said the minute his hand came off the bridge, all the solutions to his problems came into his head. And he thought, what an idiot. Why did you do that? And he says many survivors of suicide say the same thing. When they actually take the action, they go, oh my God, what am I doing? When I was in my hometown, Muscatine, Iowa, one of the things that one of the mothers who lost a child told me and told the entire audience, she said, you know, I just want you to know that my daughter did not want to die. She just wanted the pain to end, right? She said, I don't believe she wanted to die. I don't believe she wanted to leave us. I believe she wanted to make the pain end. And so this is why it's so important to train people in seeing what's going on with others. There are some things that are happening out there in the world that are very encouraging, but then there are also things about Korea. My understanding is that the percentage of the health budget that's spent on mental health in Korea is only 1.9%. And that's extremely low. It should be 5% and above. And at the same time, there are great programs. So we started called Mindful Connect or Mind SOS. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Baek Jong-ho, he started a program called, it's 보고 듣고 말하기, right? It's essentially what we call psychological first aid. So, you know, it's very popular for learning CPR and learning first aid, right? And so back in the United States, I'm trying to train everybody on a college campus in psychological first aid. And what you're taught is how do you spot people who might be in trouble? So when I took my psychiatry classes and also when I was a doctor, what they would say is, if you walk into a room with someone and you feel depressed, it's likely that that person might be depressed. But the psychological first aid teaches you how to look around and ask yourself the question, hey, could these people be in trouble? And then you listen intently. And then if you think this person is at risk, here are the numbers to call. 109, right, in Korea, right? 백구, right? There are things to do that you can do. So I think it would be great if everyone in Korea was trained in psychological first aid, because the experts believe that every single suicide is preventable. There were 14,000 suicides a year in Korea. Every one of those lives we could have saved. So UK started a ministry of loneliness. And that minister's job is to find the people who are lonely, isolated, and try to put programs together. Japan also, after COVID-19, appointed a minister for loneliness and isolation.
Wow.
And you know, I was also deeply inspired by the efforts of these two countries, because I believe Korea can do it as well, right? There's no reason Korea can't do that. So I really hope that everyone here, please ask us afterwards. We can help you get access to psychological first aid training. That's the kind of literacy that Koreans need to have. You know, the great sociologist Emil Durkheim said that he wrote this book called Suicide, and he said, high suicide rate is the surest indication of a society that has lost its social integration. They've lost each other, right? I think Koreans are capable of enormous empathy. And the example I often give, right? So the other time when my World Bank staff gave me all this information on Korea was during the IMF 시대, the 금모기 운동. So I think it was a total of 3.2 million Koreans just came to the ministry, dropped their gold. And the total value was 2.3 billion US dollars. 2.3 billion US dollars. And my World Bank staff said it was the greatest act of human solidarity they had ever seen. So what we need empathy to grow. You know, helping each other face to face, asking your friends if they're in trouble, asking your friends if they had thought about hurting themselves, and getting trained so you know what to do, you're comfortable with asking the questions. And unfortunately, I think it's no exaggeration to say that Korea is the country right now most in need of what we might call the miracle of empathy. An outpouring of empathy that's so different from all the bullying that you hear about. So, what did they say? You can do it, right? I think Korea can do it, and it has to do it. You know, a revolution of empathy, a revolution of care that will. Koreans are so smart, are so well trained, are so well educated that something that starts relatively small, I think can grow quickly, right? So if all of you can be part of the revolution in empathy, I think that it will be another Korean miracle.